Horror. It's a genre that dates back to ancient times. Stemming from folklore and myths, it's a genre that has been explored in many ways throughout literature, films, and the world of interactive video games. Horror, I would argue, is one of the main genres, right alongside sci-fi and fantasy. And while those other genres might seek to fill someone with wonder and amazement, horror is all about intent to scare. It's a genre that goes hand in hand with Halloween and its spooky themes that follow the same motto. And it isn't by accident some of the greatest games of all time have found success in the horror genre. The genre within video games is almost as old as video games themselves, and have even seen numerous influential titles over the years, each leaving its mark on the industry and setting standards for future games. So I thought, in the spirit of Halloween, we could take a look back through history and see how the horror genre evolved over time in the world of video gaming, from early atmospheric games to later jump scare horror. The genre begins just about right when home video games themselves begin, with the Magnavox Odyssey. Released in September of 1972, the Magnavox Odyssey was the first home video game console. It consists of a large white and brown box, and came with two controllers that could plug into the console. Controllers were very unique looking, being basically just rectangles with a knob on each end, and these thick wires. One knob for vertical movement, and the other was for horizontal. The console itself was only capable of drawing 3 dots in a line, so the games weren't too complex. Also, there was no sound or color. Instead, you would put these plastic overlays onto your TV as visuals for each game. The console also came packaged with dice, paper money, and other items usually meant for board games. These items would be used to play some of the staggering 28 whole games for the console, and came on these numbered game cards. Of course, our journey begins with the amazingly named Game 4, also known as Haunted House. Now, it doesn't look like much at first, but that's because the overlay isn't on. There we go. It's like I'm really there. The game is 2-player and can be described as detective work. Sounds complicated, but in reality it's basically just hide and seek. One player would play as the detective, with the other playing the role of the ghost. Using a deck of cards included with the console, the detective must make their way to the top of the house to obtain some treasure, while collecting the clues along the way. The detective will have to be careful though, because the ghost player might be haunting some of the clues, and if the detective runs into the ghost, they would lose half of their gathered clue cards. After the detective obtains the treasure, the cards are counted and the players switch roles and starts over again. Not the most complex game, nor the scariest, but through its theme, I think it fits the description, and most would agree that it is the earliest example of a horror game. Interestingly, the Magnavox Odyssey wasn't the only console to feature a game titled Haunted House. In 1982, the Atari 2600 had a game with the same name. This version, developed by Atari, owes its creation to James Anderson. In stark contrast to simplistic dots of the earlier game, this Atari version vividly expanded on the horror theme, fully harnessing the technological advancements at the time. It boasted graphics with vibrant colors, and even included sound thanks to the superior capabilities of the Atari 2600. Within the game, players take on the role of a pair of wandering eyes and are tasked to find 3 fragments of an urn randomly dispersed within a sprawling 24-room mansion with 1 exit. Players could use matches casting a temporary glow in the otherwise dim rooms that allow the player to find items or hidden areas. But this eerie manor was far from safe. Threats like vampire bats, tarantulas, and unsettling ghosts were ever present, ready to jeopardize the player's mission at any moment. A glimmer of hope lies in the 9 lives afforded to the player, complemented by the game's 9 difficulty settings. Some of these settings might ramp up the challenge, while others just change gameplay slightly, like one where there are torches on some of the walls and rooms, while other rooms are completely dark. Another difficulty introduces locked doors, necessitating a master key hidden somewhere in the mansion. Other difficulties augment enemy capabilities, such as bats stealing carried items. But in these difficulties, you can get a scepter item that deters enemies from pursuing the player. Yet on higher difficulty tiers, even this artifact can't stop the ghosts from attacking. Though now considered basic, the game's sound design was intricate for its time. Distinctive bleeps and blips mimicked footsteps and creaking doors. while the sinister sounds associated with enemies further immerse the player. By July 1982, Haunted House for the Atari 2600 would actually become one of the top-selling video games on the console. It's even been heralded as the earliest examples of the survival horror genre, which I'll cover a bit more later. As video gaming technology and the genre evolved, becoming both more diverse and unnervingly realistic, controversy was inevitable. In the early years of video gaming, many perceived games primarily as children's toys. Common ESRB rating system in place today wouldn't be created until 1994, and without it, discerning a game's content largely depended on word of mouth or reviews from gaming magazines. In these early days of home video games, many game companies were quite conservative with depictions of violence. Enemies would simply disappear or poof into smoke. Yet, the Atari 2600, known for its broad game library, did not shy away from titles that would soon become lightning rods for controversy. One such title was Halloween. Based on the iconic film of the same name, it involved the player playing as, I guess, the girl from the movie, and going throughout the house rescuing kids by bringing them to either ends of the house. Michael Myers, accompanied by his theme song, would sometimes show up throughout the game and chase the player, or kill any children in the rooms. Published by Wizard Video, the game might seem innocent by today's standards. However, its depictions of blood and decapitations were far too graphic for the sensibilities of the time, leading many retailers to pull the game from their shelves, causing the game to become quite rare today. What's more intriguing is that Halloween wasn't Wizard Video's only controversial horror game. Just a few months prior, they had released Texas Chainsaw Massacre, another game based on a movie. And it mirrored Halloween's contentious elements in many ways, and would also end up being pulled from shelves. There was one big difference in this game, though. The player was actually playing as the killer. The portrayal of blood, particularly in a setting where the players assumed the role of the killer spilling it, was a significant red flag for many parents. They expressed deep concerns over the impact of such graphic content might have on the young, impressionable minds. For a genre that would depend on many of those elements, it would only reinforce elements like blood and gore that would carry over into newer titles. Even the movies games like Halloween are based on would only become more grotesque as time went on, causing games to follow a similar route. In 1981, 3D Monster Maze marked a pivotal juncture as video games tentatively ventured into the realm of pseudo-3D. Within its visual confines, players navigated a randomly generated maze with one exit and one creature, the terrifying Tyrannosaurus Rex. Crafted entirely from rudimentary character blocks, its graphical simplicity might make you laugh today, but I think its brilliance lay in the atmospheric tension. Not knowing where the lurking predator was only amplified the game's eerie ambience, showcasing that terror often thrives in the unknown, and that even simple 3D graphics could be terrifying. Fast forward to 1992, and the gaming landscape bore witness to a massive milestone. Wolfenstein 3D, by id Software, not only crystallized its reputation as one of the earliest 3D titles, but it's often lauded as the grandfather of first-person shooters. However, its true legacy in the horror realm became palpable a year later with the release of Doom. While predominantly recognized today as the father of first-person shooter games, and not a horror game, Doom, I think, still has elements recognizable as horror. Think about it like you're a kid back then and the game had just been released. Its dimly lit, maze-like levels inhabited by grotesque creatures and demons are a testament to its horror lineage. At some point in the game, the players even walk through hell itself. I also think it shared the same energy that 3D Monster Maze did, with the player on a first-time playthrough not knowing what to expect behind each door. I think some people definitely would have been scared of Doom back in the day, due to these elements. Doom 2, while also sharing a lot of the same elements, would only drive home the first-person shooter ones, rather than the horror elements. Levels were generally more for fun and wacky. The darker elements of Doom wouldn't fully blossom until the release of Doom 3 in 2004. It was a slow-paced game that changed many of the elements that fans loved in the original two games. Even going through the levels themselves was harder due to the fact that overall, Doom 3 was a literally darker game, and made the flashlight a necessary part of it. Design choices like that in Doom 3 caused some controversy among fans, but for the horror aspects of the game, it only improved the experience, I think. Sound design in Doom 3 was quite different than the previous two entries. While Doom 1 and 2 had a large focus on music, Doom 3 very rarely used it. Instead, all you'd hear were the haunting enemy noises and the sounds of the player's actions. On occasion, music would start playing though, and it was used to make the player feel uneasy and tense, like with the Pinky Demon attack. Overall, Doom 3 was praised by critics and sold just as well as the other offerings by id Software. Yet, as the years progressed, the first-person shooter horror hybrid seemed to wane in popularity, with 2007's Fear being the last example that really comes to mind. The genre seemed to shift. First-person shooter horror games slowly disappeared, giving way to the seemingly more popular third-person survival horror genre. Survival horror stands as a towering genre in the gaming landscape, but it didn't always enjoy such popularity. Its rise can be traced back to 1992 with the release of Alone in the Dark, a title that crystallized the genre's defining characteristics. These games thrived on instilling a sense of vulnerability in the player by limiting resources, be it health, ammo, or other crucial supplies. Inventory management also became a large factor in the difficulty for these games, compelling the player to decide on every bullet expended, or whether to risk a melee encounter. Alone in the Dark, crafted by Infogrames, was a masterclass in creating a tense atmosphere, underscored by a gripping soundtrack and technical innovation. It was an early example of the genre's strengths. Its narrative drew inspiration from the eerie works of H.P. Lovecraft, it even says so on the box art, and cinematic gems like George Romero's Night of the Living Dead. The game's methodical pacing, interspersed with frantic encounters with the undead, became a hallmark of the genre. Players were thrust into a vast mansion, tasked with unearthing clues and frequently retracing their steps to unlock new areas, with the ultimate goal to navigate the treacherous environments and its lurking horrors to find an escape. The game's legacy is profound. Not only did it earn accolades as the inaugural 3D survival horror title, but it also laid the foundation for behemoths like Resident Evil, which even retained the fixed camera angle of its precursor. The genre's golden age soon dawned, spawning iconic games like Silent Hill and Clock Tower. Even modern masterpieces such as Dead Space and The Last of Us bear imprints of Alone in the Dark's influence, each forging their own legendary paths. Yet, around 2008, and with the release of Dead Space, some said that the game was a magnum opus of the genre, while others opinioned that the genre had morphed too far, leaning more into action rather than suspense. But in my view, the genre merely changed form, sorta like a zombie. Games are not created in a vacuum. Game design is sorta like DNA, combining and mutating with each generation, and I don't think I'm capable of covering exactly how the survival horror genre has evolved. Some say that the survival horror genre might be the best, since it brings out the notion of survival and converts our fear of monsters into threats, and that video games can scare players in ways far beyond what other mediums have been able to attain. But I still think there are other games not in the survival horror genre that can still elicit fear in the player on the same scale. Today, many of the same games that were popular horror game franchises back then are still around today. Resident Evil has been remade and remastered and has a million sequels, and Alone in the Dark is getting a new game pretty soon, I think. On top of that, I would say that indie titles mostly cover the other types of horror games, generally bring new ideas to them. With more modern technology and techniques, games today can really do whatever the devs want. You want a fun, cutesy horror game? Sure, Poppy's Playtime and FNAF's got you covered there. VR horror? Sure, there's lots of games that started being ported to VR. Resident Evil and Phasmophobia. And apparently they are pretty good. I wish I didn't get sick playing VR. So, to celebrate Halloween and spooky season, maybe check out some of the games I talked about a little bit. I didn't make this video to be a comprehensive list of every horror game and whatnot, so I sort of left a couple of things out. Also, I don't often play horror games, so take what I said with a grain of salt. I sure hope you enjoyed the video, though. And if you did, maybe consider liking the video and checking out a few other things I've done on my channel. I've just started recently putting a lot more effort into videos. I have my social links in the description along with links to some of the resources I used to make this video. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Peace out, enjoy the holiday, and until next time, have a good one. Bye bye.